But thank you everyone for joining us, and more people as they join our session as well. My name is Abby Prince. I'm the Director of Program Quality and Management at LeaderShape. I'm at my home office here in Central Illinois, where, gosh, it is cold. We're still in the thick of winter for sure. So if you're in a place that is sunshiny and wonderful, I want to hear all about it. But I'm so glad to be joining you all, and thank you for joining us as we continue to have a conversation, these virtual conversations for leadership educators. This is, I think, our 7th time hosting these sessions, a series of sessions for folks, and we're just glad to be able to continue hosting them and to bring in words of wisdom and expertise and knowledge from other folks that are connected to the LeaderShape community. And we took a quick break. So I think it's been a couple months since we've hosted these sessions, and we're glad to be back at them now. We began the series just to provide a platform to us to reimagine how we deliver engaging leadership programs to students through virtual programs. We started this a couple months into the pandemic, and we're just trying to host them occasionally, but fairly regularly, monthly sessions as well. And as we move more towards in-person experience, we just still feel that there is a need to gather and share resources and best practices. So we'll continue hosting these sessions as long as they're helpful. Zoom, we feel, is probably a platform that is familiar to a lot of people. It is where we are all joining together in community here today. But just a couple notes that we will have some polls that we will share for you all. Joseph is going to ask a couple of polling questions for you all to respond in the chat or using the thumbs up or thumbs down feature. If you have questions for me or for Joseph that you want to either share privately in the chat or just share publicly, and we will get to them throughout our time here together today. It is only an hour, and Joseph will have about 45 minutes to chat with you all. And so we find that it's best if you keep yourselves muted and share in the chat. But Joseph, if at any time you want to ask people to unmute themselves or share or turn their cameras on, that's perfectly fine as well. As we get started, I just wanted to share a land acknowledgement with us here. I know that the land that each of us on is the original homelands of Indigenous and tribal nations. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from these territories, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land. We ask that you please honor and acknowledge the Native and Indigenous peoples from the land that you're joining from, and give thought to your ancestry and the generations that came before you. As I mentioned, I'm here in Central Illinois on the lands of Potawatomi and Illini-Wek nations, and so I just give thought to you, those who came before me. If this is your first time participating in a LeaderShape program, I just wanted to share that LeaderShape's vision is a just, caring, and thriving world where all lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. Our mission is to transform the world by increasing the number of people who lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. And we do that most often through our programs, in-person and virtual programs, where we use this definition of leadership, which is that leadership is, oh, my mouse just got stuck. Sorry about that. Leadership involves living in a state of possibility, making a commitment to a vision, developing relationships to move vision into action, and sustaining a high level of integrity. Effective leadership takes place in the context of a community and results in a more equitable society. And so with that, I want to introduce you to my friend, Joseph Granado, who we've known for several years now as a program coordinator when he was planning our sessions in a much colder climate than he's in now, and now as a facilitator with our LeaderShape community as well. And I'm excited for this conversation around integrity and congruence. Integrity is something that we talk about so much at LeaderShape, and being able to talk about it within the context of aligning those values and behaviors as leaders, I think is a great topic to talk about. Joseph, do you want to introduce yourself and say hello to folks real quick?
Sure. Aloha, everyone. My name is Joseph Granado, and I currently serve as the Director for Student Activities and Leadership at Chaminade University in Honolulu. It is currently 8 a.m. here. So good morning from the other side of the world in the Pacific Ocean. but I'm really glad to be having this conversation. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joseph. You all would have seen Joseph's full bio on the registration page for this session. So if you don't already know Joseph, congratulations, you know Joseph now. But if you don't know Joseph, and you can read more about his bio in the registration page for the session if you want a more extensive bio on Joseph. But Joseph, let me just turn things over to you as we get started on this conversation on integrity and congruence.
Sure. So it wouldn't be a LeaderShape led initiative or conversation without some form of icebreaker. So if you're willing and able to turn on your computer screen and your camera, that would be greatly appreciated for this little icebreaker. If not, that is perfectly fine. You can still participate. But we are going to play a quick game called Zoom Around the Room. Some of you actually might be commuting, so don't don't participate if you're listening in. But in a moment, I'm going to ask you to grab a couple items that you might have in your room, wherever you are, whether that be your home or your office. And when you come back to the room or back to the space in front of the camera, you'll simply show the item in front of the camera, and then you'll hold on to that item because we'll potentially be using them later on. So in a moment when I say go, I need you to grab a pen and a piece of paper. Ready, set, go. Pen and paper. Awesome. Fantastic. And then you can go ahead and put that off to the side. Because not everyone has their cameras on. I don't know who was the last person to enter with their pen and paper, so we'll skip that portion. And then the next one is, in a moment when I say go, I need you to grab something to drink to stay hydrated. It's very important to stay hydrated. So some of you already have it right next to you. Fantastic. You can also put that off to the side. And then in 10 seconds when I say go, I want you to stand up, turn around, and then sit back down in your chair. Some of us have been sitting for too long. Ready, set, go. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Snaps for everyone for doing that with me this morning. Some of you are like, oh, thank goodness, because my Apple Watch forgot to remind me to stand up. So that was your reminder to stand up for today during this session. So stay hydrated. That's my goal for this year, my commitment. So have that handy. We'll be doing some conversations in breakout rooms as well, and opportunities for you to share. And then the pen and paper we'll use for an activity later on in our discussion. Abby, you can go ahead and hit the next slide. So these are some questions that you can either respond freely in the chat, unmute your mic. Abby, I don't know if these are poll specific questions that we want. Okay, this can be an open conversation, but show of hands. How many of you remember at what age you might have heard the word integrity when you first heard it? Does anyone recall when they might have first heard that word? Let's say, were you less than 5 years old? Nope. Maybe 5 to 10 years old? Anyone? You can also use the reaction features as well. 6th grade, okay. What about like middle school age? Maybe you heard the word integrity in middle school, high school even. Okay, so a lot of us potentially might have heard this term integrity when we were either in middle school, high school. What about when we were in college, university level? Now, how many of you, when you first heard this word, you may not have had a full understanding of it whenever you first heard it? You can either put yes, no, maybe, raise your hand. So yeah, a lot of times when people first hear this term, they don't necessarily have a full understanding of it. And part of this conversation is to kind of unpack this term and kind of develop a definition together. And let's be honest, how many of you still may not have a full understanding of the term? Like, I still have no idea what integrity is. I hear this fancy word and, it sounds nice. I can say it in an interview that I have integrity and hopefully get a job. And so we're going to kind of unpack this a little bit more. So in the chat, what I want you all to do is I want you to think of the word integrity and respond freely. What comes to mind when you hear the term integrity? And I'll give you a couple moments to respond freely into the chat. Ethics, I see ethics. Honesty about oneself. Adherence to my values. You must work for LeaderShape. Being your truest or honest self. Honest, doing what is right. Actions matching words. Ah, Roman, you must have heard this before. Doing the right thing regardless of who is watching or the consequences. I like that. Acting responsibly when no one is looking. Walking the walk. I love walking the walk. I've also add talking the talk and walking the walk to that as well. Honesty and purpose in your actions. What's interesting about the word integrity is whenever I ask this question to any audience, the most common phrase or word that pops up is honesty. So how many of you, show of hands, would say like honesty is like an integral part or cornerstone concept for that term? Okay. Awesome. So thank you all for responding to that. We'll use a lot of these later on in our discussion. But Abby, you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So this next exercise is very reflective. And it's a good thing everyone's muted because it is done in silence. Even if we were in person, this activity would also be done in silence. And it's meant to be reflective and it's meant to be personal. There are no right nor wrong responses to this. It is a challenge by choice exercise where you will be challenged to reflect and to respond openly. It is going to be a safe space. So in a moment, I will have a series of statements that I will say out loud, and then you will have an opportunity to respond to those statements with some nonverbal cues. So you can either give a thumbs up if you agree with the statement. If your camera's on, you can physically give a thumbs up, or you can use the reaction feature. You can give a thumbs down, okay? If you don't agree or you disagree with this statement, you can also do a shoulder shrug. I like the shoulder shrug sometimes of like, I don't know. You can also respond freely in the chat if that is more appropriate for what platform you're using. So you can also respond, agree, disagree, or I don't know. So with that being said, can I get a thumbs up if you understand the instructions? Fantastic. And I'll say the statements twice so that everyone can hear them fully. So the first statement, education is important to me. Education is important to me. Agree, disagree, or I don't know. Awesome. Next statement. I value honesty. I value honesty. Great. Next statement. I always tell the truth. I always tell the truth. Oh, interesting. We value honesty. We always tell the truth. I am a good friend. I am a good friend. I keep in contact with my close friends regularly. I keep in contact with my close friends regularly. I love my country. I love my country. Next statement, I trust my government. I trust my government. That one's interesting. Love our country, trust our government. I don't know. Next statement, health is important to me. Health is important to me. Next statement, I exercise and eat healthy all the time. I exercise and eat healthy all the time. Health is important to me. I exercise and eat healthy all the time. I am a scholar practitioner. I am a scholar practitioner. I read articles within my profession to stay up to date. I read articles within my profession to stay up to date. I am a religious person. I am a religious person. I treat people with respect. I treat people with respect. I care about what other people think of me. I care about what other people think of me. I judge others before getting to know them. I judge others before getting to know them. Last statement. This activity has made me think. This activity has made me think. Awesome. Snaps for everyone for participating in our little exercise. So we're going to kind of unpack that a little bit and talk. That was hard. Thanks, Abby. I'm glad it was hard. I'm glad it was challenging. Some of you, it's currently 8 a.m. still, because I see some of my colleagues from the institution and you're like, that's a lot for 8 a.m. in the morning. So we'll kind of discuss this openly in our breakout rooms here in a minute, but Abby, go ahead and go to the next slide. So in a moment, we'll go into breakout rooms and there'll be about 3 other folks in your breakout rooms. And so you'll have an opportunity to discuss a couple of things. First, we want you to be able to introduce yourselves and your campus or where you're coming from, where you're calling in from. And a couple questions to respond to. What was easy about that activity? What was challenging about that activity? And then the third, were certain statements easier than others to respond to, or which one stood out to you? So there's kind of 4 things: an introduction, what was easy, what was challenging, and what stood out to you. Were certain statements easier than others to respond to? And Abby, for the sake of time, we'll give them about 8 minutes or so to discuss within their breakout rooms. Awesome. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide then. Welcome everyone back. I hope your discussions were fruitful and beneficial, but I'm curious to hear or to read also in the chat what was kind of discussed. So if you can kindly respond, or if you want to unmute your mic, that's perfectly fine too. What was easy about this exercise or activity? What made it easy to participate? And or were certain statements easier to answer than others? Why or why not? So I'll give you a couple moments to respond into the chat, and I'll read some out loud as they come in. I think, Abby, when we were discussing for you, what made it easy for you?
Yeah, I really, I think the easy ones where it just seems so obvious to me. the things that are so important to me, like being healthy is important to me, and reading articles in my field that's important to me. But those absolute questions were the things that were such a struggle for me. I know I skipped ahead to the next question, but yeah, I see a response in the chat here too about the always and never statements. They're so hard to answer. No, I don't always eat healthy, Joseph. Don't ask me that question. A girl needs some ice cream.
Show of hands, was it easy to participate because we were virtual and maybe you didn't know some of the people? Did that make it pretty easy to participate? Do you think it was also easy to participate because this activity was done in silence as well? I know there are a lot of educators on the call right now. So some of the education focused questions like education is important to me might be easier to respond to. But I'm curious, everyone always has a hard time answering what was easy because they automatically go to the space of what was hard with this activity. So we'll go ahead and jump to that question next. So on the next slide, it says, what was challenging? What was challenging about this activity or exercise, and were certain statements harder to answer than others? What did you notice about yourself and or others while participating? So I'll give you a couple moments to think, reflect, respond in the chat freely. If you want to unmute your mic, that's perfectly fine as well. But what was challenging about this activity, or were certain things harder to respond to than others?
In my group, we were talking about how we love the idea of a healthy lifestyle, but we also love cookies. And those two were not in alignment with one another, and your questions made us realize it. And how it's easy for us to see things that are incongruent with our students, but when posed questions for ourselves, it also was refreshing to be like, you too, you know? The finger just turns right back at your own face. So it was a good refreshing reminder, I think, for a lot of the people in my group.
I think it's also hard to like set certain expectations and standards that we want to uphold ourselves. And then we get like caught up in life and you're like, actually, I can't do this all the time, every day. I'm a human being, and that is okay.
Yeah.
And
plus
so
cookies make us better people.
Especially if you give them to the right person. You're like, oh, you need a chocolate chip cookie, I can tell.
Joseph, I see Victoria's comment in the chat. I totally agree with Victoria that some things were just a little cringy to admit to. And I felt like agreeing with them, even if it was true for me, I felt like, oh, there's people that are going to see me agreeing with this. And that is so hard to agree with it and be honest about it. And you had just asked us how important honesty was to us. So
yeah, I always throw that one at the very beginning. Always. I'm like, I value honesty.
That's very strategic.
I always tell the truth.
Yeah. That's very good.
Awesome. So I'm seeing a lot of things in the chat coming through, being honest with ourselves, especially with people that we may or may not know. There are a lot of colleagues on this call that work at the institution. They're like, I don't want them to know about my true self, my authentic self. And I'm like, but you want to be authentic. You want to be real. And sometimes depending on the environment, that's a little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
Awesome. So thank you all for responding to those questions. I hope the conversations in your breakout rooms were beneficial. If we have time, we'll revisit those breakout rooms at the end, but go ahead and hit the next slide for me. So for those of you who have your piece of paper and your pen handy, you're gonna need that for this next portion. So on a sheet of paper, go ahead and draw a T-chart, like the one you see on the screen. And on one side of the T-chart, I want you to label it values. And on the other side of the T-chart, I want you to label it behaviors. And I'll show mine as an example on the camera, values and behaviors, simple T-chart. And when you have that ready to go, just give me a thumbs up or a reaction. Perfect. So that way I know we can move forward with the next portion. So going back to the term integrity and why I'm having you write values and behaviors and why this whole notion of alignment is important to have integrity. It's basically when there is this congruence between your values and behaviors specifically. And so I want to talk a little bit more about what values are and what they mean. So Abby, if you want to hit the next slide. So what does the term value mean? You can put that in the chat or you can list an example of a value. And I'll kind of explain to me what values mean to me. So values are things we want to uphold. Standards, expectations. I think of the term, when I think of the term value, I'm thinking of something that I want to possess and hold with high regard to. And I do this motion because I have it with high regard. And so for me, an example of value would be like family. I value family. I value friendship. And so what I want you all to do, and I see a couple things coming in the chat, non-negotiables is one. It's a guiding driver when you're making decisions. That's important.
Joseph, I love that image of like holding that value up, like the Lion King, right? Like with its chin towards the sun because you value it so much. I love that imagery.
So on one side of the Tchart that is labeled values, I want you to take a few moments and I just kind of want you to reflect and jot down a few values that you hold with high regard, that are your non-negotiables or certain standards that you have in your life that you want to uphold. And go ahead and jot those down on that side of the Tchart. And I'll kind of share some of my own values as you all reflect and write. So for me, I really, really value respect. That's a cornerstone concept for me as an individual, as an educator and a leader, and something that I hold with high regard to in my daily life. Another example for me is education. I work in higher education and I really value education and all that education has provided me in terms of opportunities. And some of you might have similar values to those as well. So take a few moments. It doesn't have to be an extensive list, but maybe 3, 4 values is perfectly fine. Maybe it's your faith. I mentioned family and friendship earlier. And when you have about 3 or 4 values, just give me a thumbs up. Some of you might have more, and that's perfectly fine too. Awesome. And so that's one side of this Tchart, values. It's really easy for us to list our values. Some of you might even have like 10 values listed right now, and you can fire them off really quickly. Some of you might have been asked this question before, or might have them even like on your desk or on your wall or like somewhere like as an imagery or reminder. These are the things that I value, and that's great. Abby has them on a post-it. Fantastic. But the other side to this Tchart is a little bit more challenging and often things that we forget. So Abby, if you want to hit the next slide for us, please. Behaviors. So it's really easy to list out our values, but if you want to live an aligned and congruent life of integrity, we want to start talking about the behaviors that we do in our life that uphold those values. So what does the term behavior mean? And I'll kind of explain a little bit about what it means to me. Behavior is an action. It's something you do. So if I value, say, education, for example, a behavior to uphold that value is that I stay current and up to date by reading scholarly articles and educating myself within my field. That's why during the activity, some of the statements were behavior statements. I value honesty. We can all value honesty, but a behavior is, do I always tell the truth? And if the answer is no, then do we really value honesty to the degree that we say we do? And so if anyone else has an example or definition for behaviors, by all means, feel free to respond into the chat or unmute yourself. But this next portion of our Tchart is a little bit more challenging. So on the side that says behaviors, I want you to think of one thing that you do to uphold the corresponding value on the other side of that Tchart. So mine looks like this. I have education right here, and I'm going to write the behavior right next to education. And it can only be one thing. We don't want to do too many things for one value because that's a lot to do and to hold ourselves accountable for. But what's one thing that you do for each of those respective values that you've listed? And if you have 3 or 4, just focus on those. That's perfectly fine. We don't want this to be like an assignment where you're like, I'm stressing out about it, or I don't have enough time. Just focus on the 3 that you kind of gravitate towards most frequently. For example, if faith is a value, maybe prayer is a behavior that you do. Or if respect is a value, something to uphold respect is you follow the golden or platinum rule. And then you can give me a thumbs up when you have maybe 3 behaviors listed for different values. Awesome. Joelle, it's so great to see your face. I miss you so much. Also, shout out to my fellow Silver Swords on the call and my Haslans. Thank you for supporting me. I greatly appreciate it. So if you're still writing, that's perfectly fine. I know this is a little bit more reflective and probably a lot more thinking than you were anticipating in terms of this conversation and dialogue, but I'm glad that you're reflecting and you're thinking because we don't often make enough time for conversations and dialogue on topics like this. Awesome, so I think we can go ahead and move over to the next slide. So here are some examples. And by no means does your list have to look anything like this. But because I've had time to reflect and think through things, here's some of mine. So if I value education, a behavior would be to read scholarly articles. Or if I value respect, follow the platinum rule. If I value my health, I wear my face mask. And so here are some simple examples. Feel free if you see things that you're like, I do that, or I value that, you can also add them to your list. Sharing is caring. How many of you, raise your hand, see things on this list that you might also have on yours? Whether that be a value or behavior. Awesome. One thing that's also really important is know that people have similar values to you, but their behaviors and how they demonstrate and show it might be different. And that's okay too. Awesome. Thanks, Abby. You can go to the next slide. So we're gonna go back into your breakout rooms. And in your breakout rooms, if you haven't introduced yourself, you can go ahead and introduce yourself. But I want you to select one of the values you've listed and a corresponding behavior to uphold that value. And you can share whichever ones you want, but kind of focus on your top values and your top behaviors. And then after each person kind of shares and explains, just give them some virtual acknowledgements for being vulnerable in this space with some snaps. I like to do virtual snaps. You can do some reactions, the little clap hands. I love that one. But whatever you want to do to acknowledge and affirm individuals' responses. And for this one, it won't be too long. So maybe about 3-4 minutes is enough time for this breakout room conversation. But give me a thumbs up if you understand the assignment. Fantastic. So whenever you see your breakout rooms, you can go ahead and join. So I hope those conversations were pleasant and enjoyable. Show of hands, how many of you liked hearing other people's values in conversation? And then more importantly, how many of you were like, it's pretty awesome to hear what other people are doing to uphold those values? Like, I do this because I value this. That's awesome. So now we're going to put it all together in terms of this term that we started our conversation with, integrity. So very, very simple. I have this equation up at the top: values plus behaviors equals integrity. So if you're ever asked, what does integrity mean? You can literally just say values plus behaviors. And I'll kind of do a visual representation of what that means. So everyone can take one hand up in the air and point it towards the camera and just say values. So this is our values hand right here. Everyone take your other hand, shake it, say behaviors. And on the count of 3, I want you to put your hands together. 1, 2, 3. This, my friends, is integrity. This is integrity, when your values and your behaviors match and align. I have facilitated and led this discussion with CEOs, first graders, and I use the same definition every time. There is no simpler way for me to explain what this concept is than by values and behaviors matching in alignment. This goes back to our term congruency at the very beginning. So when your values and your behaviors match, that's living a life of integrity. Cool. And also notice when you push on them, it's strong, it's firm, it's solid. And I know I work at a religious institution. That's why we pray like this. Okay, next slide. So V plus B equals I. You're like, that's too much for me in the morning. I don't know algebra. But it's walking the walk and talking the talk. Someone earlier in the chat this morning mentioned walking the walk as being a simple definition for integrity, and I completely agree. And in addition to that, it's also talking the talk. So you can say, I value honesty, education, freedom, etc. But are you doing the action, the behavior, and walking the walk simultaneously? And if you are, then you are living this life of integrity. So congruency, basically, like I said before, it's when your values align with your behaviors. Some of you also mentioned this earlier in the chat, doing the right thing when no one is looking. But what about doing the right thing when someone is looking? So it's both. You can do the right thing when no one's looking, but you also want to be there and model and role model behaviors and values when they are. What's funny is someone mentioned ethics earlier as well. It's acting based on morals versus ethics. So what are your morals? That's sometimes a synonym for values, and your ethics are your behaviors. Living a life with integrity is the basis of true, authentic leadership. I actually heard that at a LeaderShape at an institute. So I'm using direct language from this organization for that. And then my last little bit in the chat, utilizing the chat feature, who are some people, either past or present, that exemplify integrity? They're living a values plus behaviors based life. I'll give you a couple moments to respond freely. Oh, Dory. Father Marty, I knew you were going to say those. Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, MLK, Mother Teresa, of course. Thanks for the personal shout outs, friends. I appreciate that.
That's so nice. It's so nice when we have people in our lives who are those examples, people who we're around so often that we see them from a young age, perhaps, as examples of people who are living that values plus behaviors congruence, which is really nice. I feel like we're so fortunate when we can say, oh, a person I grew up with or a person I see very regularly has set such a great model of that from such an early age. That's really wonderful. That's so great. All kinds of role models here. I hope if it is someone in your life that you are listing here, that you tell them that you share with them that you have listed them as an example of someone who is congruent with their values and behaviors. I think Joseph gets this opportunity, but I would feel so touched, I think, if someone shared that with me, that they see that as a role model. And so, someone shared that their kids is their role model for that. How kids are so pure of heart and how they follow those examples. That's so wonderful to see that. How nice. I love reading that.
Awesome.
That's
love all the examples.
Yeah. That's so great.
Awesome. You can go to the next slide, Abby.
Yeah.
So we're right at time, folks.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for having an opportunity the past hour to share with me, share with each other about your values, your behaviors, and people in your life that uphold this concept known as integrity. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns that they would like to address or share? Thank you. Appreciated those comments in the chat.
Good job, Joe. Good job.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Well, great. Well, in our last minute that we have remaining for our session, if folks want to hang out and have ask any questions or share any thoughts, that's great too. But I do just want to thank you all for joining us thank you, Joseph. First of all, thank you for sharing that. I think that was a wonderful way to talk about values at a time when we need to be talking about it more and more. So thank you for that conversation. Again, if this is your first entry into a LeaderShape program, I just wanted to share with you a link to our website. There's information there on all the programs that we host, both in-person and virtual programs. If you know Joseph, perhaps you already know about programs through how he talks about our work, but maybe you can ask him about some of our other programs as well: Catalyst, Resilience, the Institute, Courageous Dialogue, and Living in Possibility, which we're actually hosting next week with a former campus that Joseph worked with. So we're excited to be able to host these programs with campuses as well. We'll continue to host these virtual series for free for folks to be able to join us and have these conversations and learn alongside and with each other throughout those conversations. However, if you want to make a contribution to our non-for-profit organization, you're welcome to do so on our donate page. And in the meantime, I did share a link in the chat feature with you all for the one remaining session that we still have this week. That session is tomorrow at the same time. It's student career development over Zoom, resumes, professional etiquette, and values alignment. And it's facilitated by someone in the LeaderShape community who works for Boston Latin High School, which is a public high school in Boston that sends a lot of students to Ivy League schools. So a lot of expertise there from Jen Levesque as we talk about that topic. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn hosting credentials over to Joseph so I can drop off and take another meeting as well over Zoom. It's Zoom all day long, but thank you all for joining us. Thanks for spending an hour of your day with us. If it was lunch or breakfast or somewhere in between, we're glad that you could join us. So thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all.